Hello, my friends. How you doing today? I'm very, very disappointed. This is the book that I told you I got out of the library that I was going to do a few videos on, maybe 3, 4, 5. I was so excited. I'm making progress through it, and I realize it's not what I expected. Where are we at here? I'm on page 198. I'm in chapter 12. I think the first video I did up to chapter 6 or 7 or something. How many pages? So 286. I got another 88 pages to go. So I'm almost 2/3 through or somewhere around there. Let's take a look here. How many chapters are there? There's 14 chapters, and I am on chapter 12. I'm very, very disappointed. I'm sorry. I'm going to take this back to the library. I'm not going to buy the book, and I'm just going to get through this. Now, the parts that I've covered so far, the banking scam, right? Chapter 4, called the Money Mafia, talking about the banking scam. And Chapter 5, the Bank for International Settlements. This is all interesting. Chapter 6, the IMF, it's time for it to go, he called Chapter 6. That's a lot of people don't know what the IMF is all about. And then Chapter 7, the biggest heist in history, about, the start of the IMF and Milton Friedman. Chapter 8, his theories on, sorry, I'm keeping my head down. I shouldn't do that. I know that. Chapter 8, government created money. He's talking about his ideas for economic reform. Now in chapter 8, so I'll pick up from where I left off, and I'll explain where he goes astray shortly. It's funny because a reminder, when was this published? 2014, 8 years ago. He's talking about his theory to solve all these economic problems. And so in chapter 8, he introduces this idea of government created money instead of banker created money, and how it can help. Pardon me. Oh, that hits the spot. Black coffee. I never thought I would ever get used to black coffee, but I can't drink milk because of my heart. And so now I really appreciate black coffee. He gives one chapter on Bitcoin. He calls it Bitcoins. See, Bitcoins shows that that's not the correct term because that's in its infancy, 2014. If only he had known. Now, this gentleman, Paul Hellyer, he passed away last year. God rest his soul. A great man. I'm sure he was very knowledgeable about a lot of things. But what I came to discover going through this is, I hate to say it, and have mercy on me for saying this, but he was not a very intelligent man. He would read a book and get an idea and then just run with it. And I'll explain more about where he goes astray a little later, and it's so disheartening. I'm sorry. It broke my heart in a way. I'll just read you this is all he does about Bitcoins. For several months, I received emails suggesting that I get on the Bitcoin bandwagon. The idea was an innovation, a very successful one for the originators and early subscribers, but I resisted because I had not checked them out against the criteria that must be applied. When I did, I found that Bitcoins are digital electronic money, phantom money, if you like. They have that characteristic in common with money created by the chartered banks. So in his mind, he associated Bitcoin with the money created by the chartered bank. Consequently, they too will not contribute to public debt reduction or play any significant role as an economic stimulus. He didn't understand that it was not an economic stimulus, but a new economic channel. It wasn't a parallel or a replacement of money created by chartered banks. It was a whole different consensus of currency from the get-go. So he didn't have it in the right frame of mind, unfortunately. You can't blame him. He's writing this in 2014, probably 2013. only, very early in the stage of Bitcoin. Finally, they appear to be subject to price manipulation. Okay, that's probably a good point. I think we're seeing that today. On May 28, 2014, CoinDesk, the voice of digital currency, reported that the Bitcoin price index recently crossed back above $590 on the 27th of May, representing a 64% gain from the 10th of April when the price was as low as $360. A currency with this kind of volatility should be eschewed and allowed to fade away as a footnote to history. So in other words, he says a currency with this kind of volatility should be avoided or rejected and allowed to fade away as a footnote to history. And he's worried about the price going from $360 up to $590. Now, of course, today we had the price going from $59,000 down to $16,000. So the volatility is there. Absolutely. He was right about that. But if only he had known, right, about how important that would become and how much, well, let alone the increase, but let alone the potential. We're seeing today that developing countries are starting to adopt it as a means of unfettered, pure monetary exchange instead of totally separate from, totally a new paradigm from what the central banks use and create out of thin air. So he didn't have a grasp on it, but I can't hold that against him because nobody did at that time. And then he goes in and talks about the gold standard. This again is all in chapter 8. And then what to do. So in chapter 8, he gives a list of 7 things that he would recommend as a as an economist. I can't even talk. A social contract between the government and people of Canada. And he focuses in particular on Canadian monetary and fiscal policy. And so if you had somebody like this working in the think tanks in Canada or the economic department or someone like that to be in charge of the finance minister, for example. Excuse me. These would be the kind of people you need in a financial department in government to have input on reforming economic policy. And so he's got some very good ideas. In fact, a lot of the ideas are beyond the scope of my ability as an armchair economist. I have a degree in economics from Concordia University, going way back, where I learned macroeconomic theory and supply and demand and all that esoteric BS, which is, they call it common sense made difficult. It's very basic stuff, right, that you learn as an undergraduate in economics. But his ideas are beyond my capability. I don't have a PhD in economics, and his ideas, based on his wealth of experience, are valuable. So the first 8 chapters of the book are very valuable for somebody that is interested in economic reform or trying to improve government-sponsored economic policies and their effect on small, medium-sized business, large business for that matter, and effect on the citizenry. So this would be very valuable for somebody to take into account, analyze it, study it, evaluate it, to see where his ideas could contribute to a better economic solution and where they may be wanting. But very good. The first 8 chapters, again, I was excited. I wanted to buy the book. But now we go into chapter 9. Chapter 9 is Visitors from Starry Realms. And he talks about his experience in the whole UFO environment. He read a book on UFOs, and then he came out and made a statement at a public conference stating that he thought that UFOs were just as real as airplanes flying in the sky. And from there, his life as a speaker for the UFO circuit, if you want to call it, took on a life of its own. He got extremely popular. He got invited all over the place. He ended up having dinner with Shirley MacLaine. Yeah, you remember Shirley MacLaine, Out on a Limb, right? A little bit of yeah, she was out on a limb. She that's the title of her book for a reason, right? She was way out there, and he listened to everybody and everybody getting into, trying to decide where they came from, Alpha Centauri, how many different races they were. He believes they live on Venus, they live on Mars. They went to Mars. They didn't find a speck of anything out there, red dirt. It's just so disappointing. And all this stuff I've studied and read before. Edgar Mitchell, it goes on and on. All this, the rehash of stuff that the weird thing is the synchronicity about this. I shouldn't be upset, because the synchronicity about this is that I've studied all this. I wrote books about alien research years ago, and I probably have unpublished material, thousands of words, and I've studied all this ad nauseum, and 99% of it is total BS, right? It's all, people's minds are fragile. And I woke up this morning, and I had a word in my mind, and the word was carousel. And I'll talk a bit about that a little later, maybe. Chapter 10, the military-industrial complex. So again, he gets right back into information of substance. But after reading chapter 9 and getting assaulted by his 90-degree digression out into the toolybarbs, and then you have to come back again into chapter 10 and the quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower. And then he talks about September 11. So this is a conspiracy, a conspiracy theory would love this book, right? Because of all the details of 9/11 that we know don't add up. I give him that 100%, of course. We know that all up. And he says that he puts these all together, saying that the next enemy, the United States always has to have an enemy. He says the next enemy is going to be extraterrestrials. Well, that was 8 years ago, and they haven't used that yet. He says that the U.S. military has UFOs that they can use, and that they've interviewed aliens from other planets. On and on and on. It gets too far. And then we get into chapter 11, global warming. And he repeats all the alarmism from Al Gore about the ice caps melting. And so I'm not going to even touch that, because he depends on, the science is clear. He quotes the Toronto Star, right? An article from the Toronto Star, and then an article from the Globe and Mail. Paul Hellyer, is that the depth of your research? You find somebody who is a paid writer, and not a good writer at that, from the Toronto Star, and then you quote from it as if it's a peer-reviewed scientific analysis of the sea level rising and the air temperatures rising, because it was written in the Toronto Star August 8th of 2012 by staff reporter Michael Woods. Oh, you broke my heart. May you be comforted where you are, Paul Hellyer, in the company of our Lord, wherever you are in heaven, my brother. Bless your soul. But you broke my heart by these statements that you did in chapter 11, that we have since seen that they've had to change the narrative from global warming to climate change. Now, you do use the term climate change in chapter 11, but you're going on and on about, look at the picture you used. Come on, the polar bear, right? We know the polar bear populations have risen and fall all over the map. You decide how you want to spin the data, and the Toronto Star decides how they want to spin the data. And if we had listened to Al Gore, the ice caps would be all gone by now. We know that, right? The inconvenient truth and all that stuff. Global warming, global warming, global warming. Your title is A Recipe for Disaster. You say it's the most important thing, and now I've reached chapter 12, full disclosure, which is going to be about, what are we talking about in here? I see that my next part I'm going to read is the United States and ET relations with the Greys, you know. Oh, come on. Paul T. Hellyer. So I'm in quicksand now. So chapter 13. So in the next, I'll have one more video on this book. I'm sorry. I'm not going to buy this book. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to return it to the library. I'm that far through. So I'm about, like I said, I'm almost 2/3 of the way through. But Carousel, you know, where does that word come from? It comes from maybe Latin. It's an Italian word. I looked it up this morning. It's an Italian word, maybe Latin root of it could be based on a small battle, a small game that they used to simulate a battle of horses. Right? They're fighting and there's in a circle, and maybe they used it as an idea of a miniature battle. And I think it's appropriate. The etymology of that word is that there's a lot of people that get stuck on this carousel in life, and they're going around in circles and circles and around, and they don't know where they're going. They're just tilting at windmills, and they're fighting every new idea that appears, and you know, every day there's a new idea that keeps us on that carousel spinning around and around. If it's not a fake moon landing, it's chemtrails. If it's not chemtrails, it's 9/11. If it's not 9/11, it's the latest conspiracy to get you to chase your tail. And how do we get off the carousel? You know, that famous sci-fi movie, Logan's Run. Once they reached a certain age, they would tell them in this totalitarian futuristic dystopia, they would tell them when you reach the age of, I don't know if it was 21 or 25 or something, they kept the entire population young. And once you reached a certain age, they say, you have to go to Carousel. And Carousel would be this thing where you spin around and they take you, and, you know, they euthanize the people, the population. It's a very dark movie. I forget the actor who played in that. And they try and escape from Carousel. They try and escape from being killed by the state. And for some reason that jumped into my mind today, probably from reading this book, because it's damaged a lot of the few remaining brain cells that I have. And if it weren't for people like Michael Saylor to give me hope that there is still the possibility of lucidity in this world, there's still the possibility of clarity in this world. Did you follow the link I included in my last video? I'm going to include it again today. Don't listen to me. My brain is hanging on by a thread. Listen to somebody like Michael Saylor. Whether you believe in Bitcoin or not, forget about Bitcoin. Just listen to somebody that has a level of clarity in their thought. And I think it can be helpful for you. Get off the carousel. Go for a walk in the woods. Love the people that's close to you. Did you listen to the instrumental by this guy who did a cover of John Mayer, Gravity? I'm going to include it again. I want you to be blessed. Don't get caught up in books like this. This will put you on the carousel. Get off the carousel. Peace, be still. Come out from anger. Remove yourself from anger. Peace, be still. Thank you for watching. God bless you. I'm not going to drone on and on. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll finish the book in one more video, and that's it. We're done. Thank you for watching. God bless you. I love you. God loves you too. Bye-bye now.